Welcome back to Street Writers.
10 minutes of writing motivation, inspiration, and activation.
Take a swing at this.
These are tips. These are tricks. This is sleight of hand to power up your pencil and percolate your brain. How's your brain doing, Mark?
Mark's brain is still functioning to some level, but I want to make an admission right here and now.
Oh, we are in a confessional booth.
Exactly. I am Mark, and I am a procrastinator.
Hi, Mark.
And I have been procrastinating since I had hair. And I think what I wanted to get across in this tip really is that it's kind of fun to talk about writing and to do these kind of, here's the trick to go when you get into this point.
Sounds really easy.
Yeah, exactly. Or use this technique. And we're going to keep doing that, or else we're going to be doing a podcast. And I want to thank all of 6 of you out there listening, because you allow us to do this. But let me tell you something. I'm having fun doing this because every time I see one of these tips, I say, oh, shit, I could use that.
Sure.
Maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
But what I also am learning is you kind of think to yourself, well, here I am giving all these lofty pointers. Why the hell am I struggling every time I write? And I think it is like an AA kind of thing where you have to be easy on yourself, because every day I go with this thing and I'm like, this should be easier than it is. And I wrestle with it and I wonder about it. And it is amazing what your mind will do to avoid having to write this crap.
And just like AA, there's bad cookies and bad coffee, or so I hear.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's a big thing when you admit that procrastination is there, that it is hard to do this.
Right.
That alone makes it okay.
Right.
Not to lose yourself in that.
Right.
But that you don't feel like you're alone.
I know.
You're not you will struggle.
Mm-hmm.
This is a struggling craft. This is a struggling ability to exercise this talent. But that's okay to admit that.
I guess it is. And you're right, it is. I just find it funny because if I go back 30 years when I was a young man, or 20 years, or even then, you think you're going to get to a point where it's like, okay, this is going to be Stephen King belting out on a computer. And I'm sure Stephen King goes through this, but when we started doing this program and you think, well, I got all these tips, I know how to do this. And then you're sitting in front of the computer or your notepad and you're like, shit.
Yeah.
I think I could write this, but I don't feel like it. Or I thought I could write this and I can't. And it just seems like, it never ends.
And for every motivational tape you buy or creative how-to book, and I've got a shelf full of them, I'm sure you do too, and they're good, and they give you ideas, but at the end of the day, you move the goalpost somewhat, but then something else gets there.
Right.
And it is a constant thing, and it's fine to admit that so long as you make it a mission to continue to work toward it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like it's a miserable process, and the only thing that will make me feel more miserable is if I don't do it and think that it beat me once more.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, like I say, in my case, I envy someone who says, I locked myself in that room for 8 hours and I wasn't going to come out till I had 30 pages written and stuff. I can't do that. I'm thrilled if I can do my little 25-minute Pomodoro. I mean, it's like celebration. And maybe that's the best thing about writing for me, is every day when that alarm comes off, I'm waiting for balloons to come through the ceiling like, congratulations, You
may want to go write at Party City.
Yeah.
But we struggled with the name for this thing in the first place. We wanted to come up with something catchy, with the Street Writers thing, but I think there's truth in that, because you can either beat yourself up over this, or you get out there and you just swing at it again.
Right.
And ultimately, you're the one in command of that ring, even if it is for that 25 minutes, and you make a sentence. You talked about King. He's a machine.
Right.
But he has said, I believe, he may walk away with like one line. Ultimately, you got one line more than you had yesterday.
Right. Thank you, Dan. I was about to go to drink, but you've saved me from continuing.
Well, don't let me stop you from alcohol. That may be one of our tips in the future.
they beat us to the punch.
Admiring the craft or being jealous of it.
Okay, so let's talk about the last two Avengers.
I like Endgame a lot. I think it was phenomenally entertaining. I was completely into it, enjoyed, cheered at it. Certainly a lot of my background and working in comics, made me feel even more pumped up about it. So
Right.
well crafted, well constructed, hugely enjoyable. I did not think from a writing point of view, like structurally, when I think about it, it's got a lot of things they introduce.
Right.
They throw time travel in there. They throw shifts in the characterization of the villain.
Right.
That after the fact had me thinking a lot and thinking in a way that's that's a little like troublesome. Like we focus like on Thanos, who in the first film, the Infinity War film, is a philosopher villain, right? In his own way.
Sure.
He's grand in that sense.
Yeah.
When you get to the end of this film and they have the big battle, which hugely enjoyable, hugely action packed, it's not the same character.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good
so
point.
the fact that you're having this confrontation again,
Right.
it is a completely different character that we are having that confrontation with.
Mm-hmm.
So while it feels like a continuance, dramatically it's a little bit different. Now I did not feel that in the moment, but things like that and the confusing elements of the time travel.
Yeah.
Afterwards, I'm like, how does that add up?
Yeah.
And frankly, any movie that disses Back to the Future, which is probably the most tightly constructed time travel series of all time,
Sure.
I have problems with.
Right.
But I don't pick it that way. But I do go back to Infinity War as a writer's exercise.
Yeah.
And I think back to that, and I find that hugely well constructed because of something the writers had said when they put that together. And they said they wrote it from Thanos' point of view.
And that's interesting. I didn't know that.
He's the hero, right? He faces challenges,
Right.
The Avengers are his challenges. He has to find these stones are his
Right.
challenges. He has to make hugely dramatic decisions and sacrificing his daughter.
Sure.
And at the end, he's chilling, right?
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
achieved his goal,
Right.
And he's kind of settling back,
Right.
And when you watch it that way,
It's
actually a perfectly well
that's a great
constructed
point.
film.
Yeah.
And while we look at it as kind of like a cliffhanger,
right.
it's really interesting from that point of view, where it's a hugely satisfying film.
Yeah.
And I think more tightly constructed in that way. But that's both are great pieces of entertainment.
And this is from Dan, who wrote Daredevil comics and other comics for years.
Hit us with your best shot.
Send us what you got and get in the ring with us. And this time Dan's going to chat till we hear from somebody outside. Tell us about that nice article you wrote.
So this is a quick pass back, I guess, a little bit to what Mark was saying at the beginning of, sometimes you hit a wall and how do you approach things. And I had an opportunity to write a business article recently. And it was supposed to be 5 trends, or maybe it's upcoming trends in a particular area. And I was struggling with it. There was that procrastination and that sense of kind of overwhelming, how am I going to get started with this? It certainly was coming partly just from that, that their wall is suddenly in front of me. Where did that come from?
Right.
And part of it, I felt like I needed to kind of approach this in a very business-like way. I needed to kind of be business-like about it.
Right.
I needed to be very professional and discover
White
what
gloves.
these trends are. Yeah, white
Sure.
gloves on. And that I could have killed myself on, and I was. I felt myself, not making the progress I wanted to. But finally, what got me through it was just shifting my mindset around it, and I stopped worrying about the professionalism of it.
Right.
And I finally said to myself, "You're supposed to be good at this. You're supposed
Moron.
to be a moron. You're a writer. You're supposed to be a good storyteller."
Right.
And I stopped worrying about what I thought a business article about these trends was supposed to be.
Right.
And I shifted it to, if you are going to approach this particular area,
Right.
what would be your intentions to do something in that area? And
Right.
and I wrote it just as myself, if you get it. And I kind of came at it with my own character, my own tonality, and I hope it's good. Ultimately, we'll see.
Right.
But it just freed me, and I think that was the key for me in approaching anything like that. Of you have to be yourself, as opposed to worrying about the conventions of a particular structure that might be in your mind. It's a big difference when you're in high school and like your teacher's like, you've got to write it in this and you've got to write it in that.
Right.
At a certain point, you just, to my mind, you write.
Yeah.
And you allow it to kind of go where it wants to be, and you need to achieve a goal.
Right.
But to me, it was just very freeing, and I finally was able to do it.
When you're procrastinating, sometimes maybe that's a signal that you need to take a different tack. You know, like maybe
Very
you're
much.
fighting it because you should be fighting it. You know, and then you found in this case you're procrastinating it because you think you're kind of locked into this cookie cutter format, and you come out of it with something maybe even better and more refreshing. So there's a case where
I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that you mention it, maybe that's probably the true reason. I'm just lazy. But I like your rationale better, that unconsciously I was fighting against it because it wasn't a good format for me.
Right.
And ultimately, when I found that my own tonality, that sort of freed me to just run with it.
Right. So I charge $150 a session for this psychotherapy, and
Very
now
good.
that I've made you feel good, I get a bonus.
Thank
for
you.
today.
All right. The check is in the mail.
So that's it today. Contact us at streetwriters.podcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, material you're working on, or tips on writing.
Tell your friends to listen, and their friends too.
So take it to the streets.
And fight to write.